countries in the world, if not the only one that has not. But you have criticized President Obama for using the word tragic to describe the incident. Why?
Well, the Obama administration actually did sign on to a presidential statement at the UN Security Council, which requires...
After watering it down.
Yeah, but the language in there still condemned what happened, called for an investigation. This isn't complicated. Israel is under attack by Hamas, which uses Gaza as a platform from which to launch attacks against Israel. They want to destroy the state of Israel, and they are supported in that by the countries Iran, Syria, and now it looks like Turkey as well. This flotilla, had it really been committed to providing humanitarian relief to Gaza, could have taken the Israeli government up on the offer to dock and take that relief in. They didn't do that. It was clearly a propaganda ploy. Clearly you had members of the Muslim Brotherhood on board. You had people who were armed, ready for the Israeli commandos to arrive. The United States has to stand with Israel. If the United States, in a choice between Israel and Hamas, tries to stand above it, which is what this president likes to do on every issue, sort of be detached and say, on the one hand, you know, as he said in his Cairo speech a year ago, on the one hand you had the Holocaust, on the other hand you've got Palestinians living under occupation. That kind of moral equivalence is not only is it wrong, not only is it shameful, but it is dangerous for the United States of America not to be standing with Israel. And when we don't stand with Israel in the face of this kind of an attack by Iran, by Syria, by Turkey, we send a very clear message that those nations can in fact attack Israel with impunity, that they can in fact threaten to destroy Israel with impunity, and that the United States won't stand by its most important ally in the Middle East.
Markos, whether or not this was a propaganda push by the people in the flotilla, it worked.
Well, you know, first of all, I'm amazed at this, with those who are against this approach, which is what got us into a lot of the trouble we are in today. I mean, the fact is, whether Israel had the right to do what it did or not, they handled it so poorly that they basically alienated much of the world. They alienated an important Arab ally in Turkey, and they put the United States in a really difficult position. And if the goal was to enforce the embargo, the blockade, they failed because now Egypt has opened up the borders. So they handled this so clumsily and so incompetently that they actually worked against their own interests.
But what you've just said demonstrates exactly the problem that Israel faces. The government of Turkey supported the launching of this flotilla. The Prime Minister of Turkey has stood up and said Hamas is not a terrorist organization. The Turks themselves have allied themselves with Iran and with Syria.
See, now
and for you to be blaming that's
Turkey
right.
is a NATO ally.
And for you to be blaming Israel for that alienation tells you what Israel faces.
There's no blame.
The truth is that the long-term security interests of Israel, in the same way as the long-term security interests of the United States, depend on marginalizing more of the extremists and bringing more of the moderates on our side. And what Israel is doing now is completely counterproductive in terms of this very simple goal, because if we fail to bring more moderates in the Middle East to see the world the way we're seeing the world, and we push them more and more into the arms of extremists, we're never going to have peace or security.
George?
To the extent that that fiction we call the international community makes it impossible for Israel to conduct this kind of boycott, to prevent Hamas from being rearmed, two things happen. You hasten the coming of the next Middle Eastern war because Scuds are coming to Hezbollah from Syria in the north. Weapons will pour in to Gaza, from which 6,000 rockets have been fired at Israel. So Israel will have to take active defense and go in again to Gaza and to southern Lebanon. Furthermore, no Israeli prime minister is going to allow a two-state solution if a Palestinian state based on the West Bank cannot allow some kind of armed presence on its eastern border to prevent the influx of arms into the new Palestinian state. Therefore, a two-state solution becomes impossible and the next war becomes likely, all because people are trying to undermine the legitimacy of Israel's self-defense.
But what is happening in Gaza right now, as Senator Kerry said earlier when you asked him about pasta, is a real humanitarian disaster in violation of the Geneva Convention that forbids collective punishment. What is happening in Gaza is collective punishment. And if you look at the list of things that are not allowed to go into Gaza, you understand why there is such a chaos there.
But Senator Kerry did point out that it
that
was
they
some
let
of this.
faster in, but
No,
there's a
no,
lot of
no,
other
but
things they're not letting in.
that the Hamas government was responsible as well for the humanitarian crisis.
Absolutely.
And the
The
West
Hamas
Bank is
government, let
not-
me
you
just
have to
finish
look
one
at the
second.
difference,
The Hamas government is a terrorist organization. Nobody's saying anything contrary to that. The Hamas government is a terrorist organization that won an election that Bush, Cheney, and Condi Rice encouraged to happen.
Well, you know,
Look at the difference, though.
Can I ask you about, you were at the State Department in 2005, 2006, when these elections were pushed forward, and some people were saying, don't do it, they're not ready for it. Do you think that was a mistake in retrospect?
I do. I don't think they were ready for it. I don't think we should have pushed it. And I think that Senator Cornyn's point earlier, though, was a very important point, which is no matter how they came into power, they're a terrorist organization. And if you look at the difference between life on the West Bank and life in Gaza, I think it puts the lie to this notion that somehow the Israelis are responsible for the conditions inside Gaza. Hamas is running Gaza. And essentially the position that you guys are taking says that Israel does not have the right to stop a flotilla.
Nobody said that.
Stop a flotilla
Nobody
from
said that.
sending. Well, but your criticism. No,
I said
sorry.
they handled it in such a way that was so incompetently that it backfired on Israel.
Okay.
Not that they didn't have a right to do so.
So you agree that they had a right to stop that flotilla?
There's ways to do it that weren't as aggressive and counterproductive as they did it in the middle of the night, over the air. I mean, there's ways to handle blockades in international settings. You can
Markos,
use boats to stop, to redirect.
This was not a peaceful flotilla. You just had a flotilla yesterday that in fact was peaceful and that landed with no incident. So for you to second guess and to sort of say there are ways they could have done this.
Flotilla is not peaceful when it doesn't have.
The people on board were armed and ready to meet the Israeli commanders.
I do want to move on to one subject.